Number 10. Driscoll Hotel, Austin. While there are many reportedly haunted hotels in Texas, this one seems to top many lists for the most ghostly activity. Most of this seems to stem from the very chilling stories of room 525. In the 1880s, there was a young couple that was having their wedding at the hotel, or at least that was the plan. The groom got cold feet and left the bride at the altar. Now, heartbroken, she ran upstairs to their suite, room 525, and took her own life. And it said she still walks the halls in her long white gown. But that isn't the end of the story, because in 1991, another bride was spurned at the altar, and after going on a shopping spree with the groom's stolen credit card, she too returned to room 525 and took her own life. Since then, guests have seen her carrying a pistol and walking into the room, all without ever opening the door. So don't stay in room 525 or you may never check out. There's also an eerie painting that's said to be inhabited by the spirit of a young girl, the daughter of a senator, whose expression seems to change on its own. People who view the painting have said that they feel like they were floating off of the ground, though they remained on the floor. They also say that their equilibrium and balance was off for a few hours after looking at her. Number 9. USS Lexington, Corpus Christi. Now before I tell you about this spooky ship, make sure to hit the subscribe button so you can catch all of our amazing videos. As a naval vessel that saw actual battle, there have been multiple lives that were lost on board, including that of an engine room operator who still roams the ship at night waiting for the battle to end. The crew of the ship have often reported flickering lights and doors slamming on their own, which, given that this is a very well-maintained historical site, you'd think that they would have found the cause by now. Maybe it's just the ghosts of sailors lost to time. Coming in at number 8, we have the Marfa Lights in, you guessed it, the town of Marfa. While there is so much beauty in the area and plenty of non-spooky reasons to visit, the main tourist attraction to this quaint little town are floating, sourceless lights that seem to change color and even move in the night sky. Many visitors make the journey at all times of year to see the lights, and there's even a yearly festival made in their honor. Reported since 1883 by people of all ages and professions, no one knows what these floating orbs are. They appear at random, but usually in the same area of the sky, and since there's so much open space and low light pollution, it's perfect for stargazing, or seeing spooky orbs, I guess. Some say that these lights are UFOs, some say spirits, and others think that they're just headlights. All that I know is that if I see a mysterious floating orb, I'm going the other way. Number 7. Woman Hollering Creek, San Antonio. Said to be the home of La Llorona, or the Weeping Woman, this creepy creek leaves anyone who visits with a sense of dread. As the story goes, La Llorona was a woman who was distraught that her once doting, affectionate husband left her for another woman. And after confronting him and leaving the confrontation with cuts and bruises, she waded into the water, dressed in her best clothes, and drowned herself in the creek, right after doing the same to the rest of her family. Her chilling screams for her children can be heard all the way from the highway, giving her and the creek its very apt name. Many people have felt themselves being drawn towards the water by ghostly voices, and some have even been tugged towards the bank of the creek. Perhaps it's La Llorona looking for her next victim. The screams heard and feelings of being pulled into the water have mostly been reported by younger people, making this all the more terrifying given what La Llorona did. Number 6. El Paso High School. Now, when you're thinking of haunted places, a school isn't exactly the first place that comes to mind, but this one has quite a story. In 1985, the graduating class received their yearbooks, and when basking in the nostalgia of their group photo, they noticed something odd. A woman who no one could identify was in the picture with them. Now, obviously, that would be quite concerning. I know I'd be freaked out if there was someone I'd never seen before standing next to me in a picture. The blurry apparition still has not been identified to this day, but some think it's a student who fell from a window years before who never got to graduate. I say give her the diploma. She's already in the yearbook. Sticking in El Paso, in our number 5 spot is the Plaza Theater Performing Arts Center. As someone who loves the theater, I try to see as many shows as I can, but I think I'll skip visiting this theater, no matter how good the production is. Built in 1930 as a movie house, demolished for a parking lot in the late 80s, and rebuilt as a live theater space, this building has seen many changes, but some things have stayed constant throughout its history. Many workers of the building have reported seeing a man in one of the box seats, in a tuxedo, smoking a cigarette. One crew member recalls seeing him after turning on the stage lights, sitting alone in the box, as though he'd been there for hours already before the lights came on. And when she saw the smoking man, he turned to her and said, "We all have our time to die," and then threw himself headfirst over the balcony, vanishing before he could hit the ground. A former vice president of the theater also recalls seeing a ghostly girl bouncing a ball in the aisles of the theater and always staring. He also noticed that there was a rag doll that seemed to appear and disappear on its own, moving to locations that it couldn't have without someone's help. Even locked doors didn't seem to stop it from appearing in the projection booth. Number 4. Yorktown Memorial Hospital. Established in 1951, this abandoned hospital has been named one of the most haunted places in America. And since over 2,000 patients are said to have died within its walls before it shuttered its doors in 1992, I can see why. Reports of apparitions of people in hospital gowns running through the corridors or hiding in rooms are numerous, along with moving wheelchairs, disembodied voices, and footsteps. But there are some who have even more chilling stories. While exploring the halls and rooms that have remained largely untouched since its closure, some ghost hunters have been touched, had their clothes tugged on, or even pushed to the ground while being given a ghostly warning. Some of the spirits are believed to be that of patients who had illegal medical experiments performed on them and lost their lives in the process, making for a very vengeful ghost. Number 3. The Screaming Bridge in Arlington. On the night of February 4th, 1961, 6 from the local high school were taking a drive after seeing a movie earlier in the evening. While driving down Bedford Road toward the rail crossing bridge, which had mysteriously been burned down a few years previous, only rebuilt earlier that year, they were startled by another car reversing and honking its horn wildly. This caused the driver to speed up out of fear, and not realizing that the bridge was out, the car careened over the edge and crashed into the other side of the ravine. Unfortunately, 3 of them lost their lives that night, and their screams of terror can still be heard by anyone traveling the renamed Greenbelt Road. The saddest part of this story is that the car that startled them was being driven by a man who had just barely avoided going over the edge of the broken bridge himself, and he was reversing and honking to warn them of the danger ahead. The entire area, now known as Death Crossing, is now blocked off and no traffic travels through. At number 2 on our list, we have La Carafe in Houston. This historic bar, built originally as a bakery in 1860, has been serving patrons for decades, but many come not only for the drinks, but for a paranormal experience. Bartenders and visitors alike have seen apparitions of a hulking man walking upstairs and hearing his giant footsteps pacing the floor. No one knows who this may be, but some say he died there from some nefarious means. The former manager of the bar can also be seen staring out of the top floor window, looking over his patrons and ensuring they're having a good time. And he seems a bit more friendly. However, there are some that report the sounds of a body being dragged across the floor above, but when the sound is followed, nothing's there. Makes you wonder what happened upstairs. And since it's one of the oldest buildings in the city that's been in continuous use, it's become a tourist hotspot and a historical site. Personally, I won't be stopping in for a drink anytime soon, no matter how good the cocktails are. And finally, number 1, the Alamo. While students are taught to remember the Alamo, they don't really teach about all of the spirits who can never forget. In the infamous battle, thousands of soldiers lost their lives, and many were dumped into mass graves and others left to rot out in the sun, so it makes sense that you'd have some pissed off ghosts wandering the ground. There have been countless reports of soldier apparitions walking with weapons in hand, taking their usual patrol, and even full platoons screaming and charging into battle. Even in the afterlife they couldn't get away from war, and so they continue to fight their invisible enemy. There are also accounts of a small blonde-haired boy hiding in multiple places where the gift shop now stands, so make sure to pick up your haunted keychains. While the buildings are beautiful to look at and the area is interesting to explore, the history can leave one with a haunting feeling, and with all those spirits around, I'd be careful touring here, especially at night.
Starting us off with number 10 are the Vampire Brothers. Has anyone seen the originals or the Vampire Diaries? I feel like these legends sort of remind me of that plotline with vampires in New Orleans, etc. But anyway, during the 30s, brothers John and Wayne Carter lived somewhere in the French Quarter of New Orleans. During the day they worked as laborers and tried to keep to themselves as much as possible. But one day a woman somehow escaped from their apartment bleeding as she went because her wrists. Police later found multiple other people tied to chairs with their wrists their apartment alongside dozens of dead bodies that had no blood. The story was that the brothers kidnapped the people to drink their blood every night after work. It took more than 8 police officers to hold down and catch the brothers before they were executed and buried. But the weirdest part was that years later, when another Carter in the family was being buried, the brothers' bodies had vanished from the vault. Legend goes on to say you can still see them roaming around New Orleans today, and someone who owned their apartment years ago said he once saw 2 figures that matched their description whispering to each other and then jumping off a 3rd floor balcony. That's basically the original's plotline. It's not even funny. Maybe it was based on this. It probably was, and I just don't know. Coming in at number 9 is the Lapret Massacre. I'm just loving these. They're just so juicy. Louisiana is filled with so many legends. I just love this. But anyway, towards the latter half of the 1800s, a rich man from Turkey owned Lapret House and also claimed he was a disposed sultan. The man transformed the house into an Eastern pleasure palace essentially. The doors and windows were blocked with bars, incense filled the air, and men guarded the house as well. The gates were locked, so the place really was like an inescapable fortress. The house even had a harem filled with girls of all ages as well as young boys too. If that wasn't enough cause for alarm, one morning neighbors saw blood trickling out from under the iron gates. The police were called straight away and they forced open the doors to a scene of pure horror. Blood was everywhere. All over the walls and floors there were amputated limbs, headless bodies, and all the harem girls and guys, even the guards, had been. And you'd think it was the Turk who had gone insane, but he was also found mutilated and buried alive somewhere on the property. As to the perpetrators, people think that maybe they were a pirate's crew that had unfinished business with the man, or maybe the Turk's own family. But can you imagine? There was so much blood it was oozing out of the property. That's horrific. Anyone staying in the house after that has seen people in Eastern clothing roaming the halls, and even sounds of footsteps supposedly from all the people who have died there. At number 8 we have the Grunch. So the east of New Orleans was mostly just woodland initially, and legend has it a group of humans called the Grunch used to live in those woods. They were said to be a mix of dwarves and albinos who were forced to live there because people thought they were made by the devil, but then they inbred into something else completely. People said their offspring became inhuman in appearance. Grunch Road was meant to be a place where teens could go to make out if they weren't scared, but people started to go missing. Some goats and then actual people, all drained of blood and dead, and as this was happening, more and more strange deformed creatures started being seen. Apparently people believe that the people in the forest sold their souls for a beast that could protect them from everyone in society, whereas others believed after years of receiving cruel treatment they just went insane. They were and it's said that if you see a stray goat that looks like it needs help near those parts, you shouldn't stop because it's just a trap. Filling our number 7 slot is Marie Laveau. Sorry if my French accent's bad, it probably is. And if you've seen American Horror Story Coven, then you already know who this woman is. Born in 1801, Marie was a central figure in New Orleans famous for voodoo. She had a lot of power and prestige and worked as a hairdresser, which essentially meant she basically knew the secrets of everyone in town. Rich, poor, black, white, she knew it all about everyone. She was the first person to mix voodoo with Catholicism to form a new religion that's still practiced today. It's called New Orleans Voodoo. The legend goes that although Marie died in 1881, she resurrects every year on St. John's Eve to lead the faithful in worship. Her ghost, as well as her daughter's ghost who continued her magic after she died, have been spotted numerous times around New Orleans. Now at number 6 is the Rugaroo or the Loup-Garou. Now this is a legend that's been passed down from generation to generation. This creature is meant to be like a werewolf of sorts and is a pale white color. It wanders the streets during the night looking for a hero, which is a bit of a plot twist. It causes havoc in crowds until someone stabs or shoots it. When the first drop of blood comes out of it, the Rugaroo turns back into a man and tells the person his real name. He'll go on to warn the hero that they can't mention the incident to anyone for a full year, or they too will become a Rugaroo themselves. Mostly parents tell their children about the tale to stop them from misbehaving, but it is apparently true. Coming in at number 5 is Madame Mignet Canal, I think. Probably not. Now, she wasn't famous or anyone well known, and I don't think anyone would have known who she was today if she hadn't committed on the 3rd floor of her house. She from an overhead beam, but before doing it, she also killed her own small white dog. And after that, and after World War II, the house was sold to the grandparents of someone called Ramon. Ramon said growing up, when him and his siblings were misbehaving, their punishment would be sitting alone on the staircase going up to the 3rd floor. He remembered that every time he did that, he saw a woman wearing a white dress that he just didn't recognize, and she always had with her a small white dog. One night he woke the whole house because he was screaming in his room. When the lights came on in his bedroom, his cheek was bright red because someone had slapped him in his sleep. Even his father met her. He climbed into bed one night hoping to hug his wife, but instead was hugging this ghost. They saw a woman standing over one of the babies' cribs, and they could see through her. They even used to hear barking from the 3rd floor when they definitely did not have a dog. Haunting confirmed. At number 4 is Count SaintGermain. Now, Count SaintGermain was the epitome of a vampire, or what you've been told is a vampire based off, stuff like Twilight. He spoke 6 languages, was a master at the violin and piano, and he also composed his own music. He was insanely rich, even though no one knew where his wealth came from, but he claimed he was the son of Francis II, who was the Prince of Transylvania. So his wealth could have been from being royalty, but no one even knew anything about his family or lineage. There was just no information about him. But supposedly he was very skilled at alchemy and had figured out how to attain immortality. He looked around 40 years old in all his portraits, and that look lasted for over half a century, and no one's 40 for that long, honey. Even at social dinners, no one ever saw him eat. He would just sip wine and speak about things that just made you feel inferior. He died in 1784, but there have been countless stories of people having seen him after that. In the 20th century, a man moved to New Orleans called Jacques SaintGermain, who looked exactly like the Count and had the same wealth and knowledge. Again, having dinner parties, but only ever sipping wine. Apparently, one night a woman stayed late at his house and he tried to bite her neck, but she escaped and reported it to the police. When they went to investigate, he was nowhere to be found. What they did find was cloths with blood on them and bottles of wine, and the policemen decided to pour themselves wine, but found that the wine wasn't just wine, it was wine mixed with human blood. Vampire confirmed. Now at number 2 are the Casket Girls. Now, because of the reputation that New Orleans had back in the day, treacherous, some of the highest murder rates, notorious for missing persons, the area had trouble getting women to move there, and I mean rightfully so. Most men there were originally sent there because they were murderers, thieves, culprits of any crime really, but thankfully there was a boat full of women coming that the French had convinced to move to the city during colonization, but they all abandoned ship in Mobile, Alabama. Now, these girls were called the Casket Girls because they carried small chests with them, but the chests were shaped like mini coffins. So when most of them escaped the boat, they left behind 300 coffins. Most of them were said to be empty, but some were rumored to contain the bodies of the undead, aka vampires. They were also nailed shut because they had a habit of opening themselves, which is just already suspicious. Later in 1978, a pair of reporters wanted to see the coffins, but the convent's priest said no. So the reporters climbed over the wall one night with all their equipment to see the coffins in real life. The next day, their equipment was thrown over the street outside, and on the front steps of the convent were their bodies, as well as 80% of their blood gone, and no one knows what happened to them. I mean, there are theories. And finally, at number 1 is La Laurie House. And I feel like this story has been in so many shows and movies, so most people probably do know about this one, but it's still a key legend from Louisiana. Located at 1140 Royal Street, this house is still one of the most haunted houses in New Orleans. During the 1800s, Dr. Louis La Laurie and his wife Delphine were known for always hosting lavish dinners there. She was charismatic and well respected, but Delphine had a sadistic dark side. The house had dozens of she used to every single one of them. Due to cruelty laws, some of her were auctioned off, but she just made her relatives buy them back for her in secret. She kept her cook change the fireplace for one, and she chased a young girl off the roof of her house with a whip. People started becoming suspicious when they started noticing that the came and went quite quickly at the house, and some just straight up disappeared. Her neighbor actually saw this from the roof, and so rumors went around more and more, and people started declining invitations to the house. In 1834, a massive fire broke out in the house, supposedly started by the cook, and it went through the whole house. Honestly, if I was the cook, I would have done a lot more than just arson. But anyway, after the blaze was out, firefighters found a door, a secret bar door in the attic that hid more than a dozen others. They were all chained to the wall, locked in dog cages, or strapped to makeshift operating tables. Body parts were all around the floor, heads, intestines, all of it, just in buckets around the room. Their treatment was horrible. Women had their stomachs sliced open and their intestines were wrapped around their waists. One woman had animal poo in her mouth and then it was sewn shut. There were a lot more, but I'll just leave it there. And either way, it was known that Delphine acted alone and a mob gathered outside her house, but she and her family vanished. Some say they went to France or wherever, but hauntings started at the house as soon as they fled. Cries, groans, everything was heard, and finding anyone to live there was nearly impossible.
Starting us off at number 10, the Hanging Jail. Actually called the Beauregard Parish Jail, it opened in 1915 and it was actually kind of a big deal because it had extraordinary amenities for a jail. Each cell had a window and a bathroom, and cells on the top floor even had a skylight. But despite its beautiful architecture, it was also the site of Louisiana's first double execution. In 1926, 2 men were committed after killing and robbing a taxi driver and sentenced to be hanged. They claimed innocence, but still the verdict passed and the 2 men died in the jail, giving it the infamous name. It remained open until 1981, and now a museum. It's believed to be haunted by the 2 men along with other inmates who felt they were unjustly put behind bars. Many have reported being pushed or hearing voices while visiting, and some have even captured photos of strange, inexplicable, shadowy figures lurking on the porch and window, leaving no other explanation than to assume the jail remains a haunted and terrifying place to visit. Coming in at number 9, Pleasant Hall. This story has 2 versions, so I will let you decide which one you think is true. Once upon a time, while attending the Louisiana State University, a resident tragically took her life in the now infamous room 312. One story says the girl killed her boyfriend in a fit of rage and then, shocked at her actions, took her own life because she could not live with what she had done. The other story claims the girl jumped out of the window of her room and fell to her impending doom, terrifying the students on campus that witnessed the horrifying sight. But which one really happened? Well, it seems that is the hard part to find out. But what's not difficult to know is that the spirit of the girl remains, haunting Pleasant Hall to this day. Students have reported seeing her ghost roam the campus and hearing strange noises coming from the other side of room 312. And sometimes at night, when you least expect it, the door to room 312 will open and shut all on its own. Coming in at number 8, St. Louis Cemetery number 1. Regarded as the city of the dead, the St. Louis Cemetery number 1 holds more ghost stories than you'd want to encounter in a lifetime. In the span of a mere block, the cemetery has over 700 tombs and over 100,000 bodies are known to be buried at the site. Most famously, it is the burial site of Voodoo Queen Marie Laveau, the most revered and feared practitioner in New Orleans history. Reports of her ghost have detailed her in her signature red and white turban, and claim she will suddenly appear out of nowhere and then vanish from plain sight just as fast. Visitors have experienced scratching, pinching, shoving, suddenly becoming ill, and even hearing her haunting voice echo across the cemetery, sending many that have dared to visit running for the hills. So just be careful if you choose to stop by. If you aren't careful, she could curse you for life. Next up at number 7, the Calcasieu Courthouse. The history of capital punishment is a torrid one, and as it turns out, this courthouse is actually famous for just that. Back in the 1940s, there was a woman named Toni Jo McCuiston. She lived quite a tumultuous life involved in drugs and her local brothel, but one day she fell in love with a man who frequented her establishment named Claude Henry, and so they got married and she started to really turn her life around. But after Claude was sent to jail for 50 years for killing someone, something inside Toni snapped. She planned to bust Claude out of jail with a friend, but in the process of stealing a car, killed the owner and left him in a ditch. She was caught and sentenced to death and would become the first first ever woman to be executed by the electric chair in Louisiana. It's said her spirit still haunts the courthouse, locking doors and messing around with the filing systems during the day, but steer clear at night, as residents report you can smell her burning hair and hear her unruly screams echo through the streets. Coming in at number 6, Pea Farm. Nicknamed the Pea Farm, it is not actually a farm, nor does it have anything to do with peas. It is, however, an old abandoned prison. The facility was in operation between 1905 to 1950, and rumor has it that life was incredibly rough and difficult at the Pea Farm for prisoners, even more so than your typical prison. Beatings and lashings were commonplace, and even killing of prisoners was nothing to bat an eye at. So it's no surprise that those whose life may have ended here have stuck around, maybe trying to seek revenge on those who hurt them. Today, the prison is strictly off limits to visitors, but those that walk past have reported hearing shrieks and other strange noises coming from inside the abandoned building. Maybe no one is allowed for a good reason. Next up at number 5, Bonnie and Clyde's ambush site. Maybe you've heard of the infamous couple, but just in case you haven't, let me catch you up. They were notorious bank robbers across Louisiana and Texas during the Great Depression in America and made quite a name for themselves. In recent years, it has been suggested their exploits were exaggerated, but one thing that wasn't is how they died. The day was May 23rd, 1934, and police from both Louisiana and Texas managed to corner them in their stolen car. Authorities fired more than 100 bullets at the couple, and as the story goes, you could hear Bonnie's scream from the next town over. Residents claim that if you visit the site of their death, the ghosts of the couple will make themselves well known to you. Apparitions have shown in photographs, and some have even heard what they believe to be Bonnie's scream as she took her last few breaths on this earth. Coming in at number 4, Oak Alley. Once upon a time, it was one of the largest plantations in Louisiana, and just like every other of its kind, it has a dark past. Since its dark days, it has turned into a bed and breakfast and historical site, but the people that were tortured remain, haunting the ground and terrorizing visitors. Numerous accounts have claimed to hear unexplained sounds like blood-curdling screams in the middle of the night, or the sound of a horse-drawn carriage clopping along the path. Some visitors have even experienced being touched or grabbed by an unseen entity, and one investigator got so scared he dropped his camera while trying to capture a spirit. Paranormal investigators have managed to capture several EVPs that indicate unhappy ghosts lingering the property, and though no one has been hurt staying here yet, tread carefully as you never know just when you could set the spirits off. Coming in at number 3, Alice's grave. Alice died in the 19th century, and although she had a fairly normal life while alive, her death and afterlife were anything but expected. She was laid to rest in an above-ground grave, but soon after, many of the townspeople began to question, was the grave haunted, or worse, was Alice a witch? As the legend goes, in the middle of the night, the large slab of marble covering her grave was removed on 3 separate occasions, and each time, her remains were left outside the grave. No one stepped forward admitting to have moved Alice or the slab, which led people to believe that Alice was a witch trying to escape her grave and haunt the town. Eventually, large iron bars were placed over the grave in an attempt to hold her spirit inside. But this hasn't seemed to stop her, as locals claim you can still see her wandering the cemetery at night. But just exactly what is she looking for? That is one of the many unanswered questions that leave visitors terrified, unsure if she comes in peace or if she is out for revenge. Next up at number 2, the Manchac Swamp. While many are familiar with the legendary voodoo priestess Marie Laveau, she was not the only one of her time. Julia Brown was a well-respected healer and midwife who resided in a small village called Fromnatcher. At first, she loved caring for her village, but after some time she started to feel disrespected by her community, feeling as though they were taking her gifts for granted. Julia began scaring the village, telling them dooming predictions about their impending deaths, and the townspeople, unsure if she was placing a curse or foretelling their future, became very troubled. Shortly before her own death, she said, "One day I'm gonna die and I'm gonna take all you with me. And just days after she was buried, 3 entire villages were destroyed by a hurricane and hundreds of lives were lost. To this day, many believe the spirit of Julia Brown haunts the swamp, and visitors have reported hearing blood-curdling screams and the sound of her voice singing cryptic and frightening songs, terrifying all those that dare walk by. And last up in our number 1 spot, La Laurie Mansion. Arguably one of the most infamous buildings in all of Louisiana, La Laurie Mansion was once home to the cruel and torturous Madame Delphine La Laurie. Even in her time, she was regarded as a monster and was known to have her slaves taken from her on more than one occasion due to their outrageous mistreatment. In 1834, a fire broke out in her mansion, and when police and fire marshals arrived at the site, they found one of her slaves chained to the stove, claiming to have started the fire to try and take her own life to escape the cruelty. Another 7 victims were found in her attic, suspended from the ceiling, mutilated and barely alive, stating to have been imprisoned for months. Once news broke out of her cruelties, citizens attacked the house and demolished everything they could. While the original building no longer stands, the grounds it stood on are some of the most haunted in all of Louisiana, as it's believed nearly 100 people lost their lives under Madame Delphine's cruel supervision. Visitors have reported feeling the violent touches of ghostly hands, and a medium that visited stated that there is a very dark demonic entity that resides within the building's walls. So just tread carefully. Should you choose to visit, the spirits that live there are not too thrilled by visitors in their home.
10. Bragg Road, Saratoga. The Big Thicket in southeast Texas is a dense forested area that runs along the Alabama border, and there are very few roads that cut through it. One of the most infamous is Bragg Road. In 1904, the road was built as a rail line to connect the now abandoned town of Bragg to the now thriving Saratoga. While the rails have long since been torn up, some ghostly reminders of the past still remain. When you drive down this lonely 8-mile long dirt road at night, you, like thousands of others before you, are sure to see what are known as the ghost lights. Basketball-sized orbs of light that float and dance through the air, even changing in color according to some. There are a few stories on what these lights actually are. The most popular story is that a tragedy occurred on a midnight train run. The conductor, sleep-deprived from a long journey through the state, needed some fresh air to wake himself up. He stuck his head out the window, and in a freak accident, he was decapitated by a tree. And now his spirit is wandering the road, searching for his lost head. The other prevailing theory is that the light is a ghostly lantern belonging to a groom whose bride left him at the altar. He went searching for her in the forest at night, but has still never found her to this day. Number 9. Baker Hotel, Mineral Wells. Mineral Wells is known for its, you guessed it, mineral-rich water. In the 1880s, people would travel from all over Texas to drink some, and it supposedly had healing powers and could cure almost any ailment. And with that kind of tourist attraction, you need somewhere for all of these folks to stay. And so, in 1929, the Baker Hotel was opened. With 14 floors and 450 rooms, it was the biggest hotel for miles, and it used the mineral water as a draw for all sorts of people. To this day, workers and visitors alike find small things missing from their pockets or bags while touring the grounds, and workers have later found them on the floor in the Baker Suite, the room where the owner lived and died. They also report the smell of cigar smoke in the air, another habit of Mr. Baker, further proving his presence. But there are also some less friendly spirits here, notably that of the chopped bellhop, who lost his life in a freak elevator accident that saw his top half removed from the bottom half of his body. He's seen floating sans legs and screaming to be made whole again. Workers recommend you stay away, lest you meet the same fate. Known for its programs in engineering, technology, and agriculture, Texas A&M is one of the most highly regarded universities in the state. But the engineering building is home to not only future engineers, but the spirit of a former worker. In 1959, Roy Sims was the foreman for the meat locker in what was then the Animal Industries building. He was showing his assistant some tips on butchering bacon, and when the assistant stepped out to get them both some coffee, the knife slipped and Sims accidentally sliced his leg, severing his femoral artery in the process. The assistant returned to see Roy bleeding out on the floor and called an ambulance, but it was too late. and he passed away. Students and faculty alike report strange happenings in the building to this day. Noises and crashes, cool breezes when all the windows and doors are shut, and even objects moving or being out of place. And many attribute this to the ghost of Roy Sims just trying to get back to work. Number 7. Lake Highlands High School, Dallas. Imagine being back in high school, and during a rehearsal for the school play, the lights suddenly go out, and when they come back on, costumes have moved, props have crashed to the floor, and you see a ghostly apparition rise back up to the rafters. This is exactly what some students and faculty have reported at the Dallas High School. Reportedly, the ghost is that of a former student, Elizabeth, who took her own life jumping from the roof of the auditorium. While many attribute the cold spots and strange noises to the wind, there is no denying that there was a student named Elizabeth who attended the school around the same time the urban legend takes place and passed away, though the cause remains unclear. Number 6 on our list, the Ritz Theater in Corpus Christi. While there are no accounts of specific deaths associated with what was once South Texas's most beautiful theater, there are certainly enough ghostly happenings to make anyone's skin crawl. Paranormal investigators have reported that while walking through the now crumbling building, you can feel cold spots, hear voices, and see orbs floating through the air, some of which they've actually been able to catch on camera. Perhaps these are spirits who never managed to move on, or maybe they're happy right where they are, enjoying a pleasant night out at the theater in the afterlife. We won't know until somebody asks. Number 5. Jefferson Hotel, Jefferson. Originally built in 1851 as a cotton warehouse, the Jefferson Hotel has had haunting stories for decades. To this day, workers who were once skeptical of spirits have been converted to believers after dishes have gone flying, phantom footsteps were heard, and the front switchboard lit up as though the rooms were talking to each other, even when the hotel was closed to guests. Many attribute this to the ghost of Elizabeth, common ghost name I guess, who took her own life in the hotel after her soon-to-be husband sent a note that he would not be coming to the wedding. This has been verified by newspapers to have happened in the 1870s, and there have been sightings of a woman in white roaming the halls of the hotel ever since. Number 4. Henley Rowe, Galveston. One of the oldest still operating commercial buildings in the city, Henley Rowe has seen many occupants throughout its time. Most notably, it was a watchtower during the American Civil War. Some have reported a soldier on the roof of the building at night watching out for Union Army members. There are also many spirits who appear soaked and wet from the 1900 storm that they and 12,000 others lost their lives in. However, my favorite story from this building is actually more recent. The manager of the market was gifted a photo of Dr. Wilbur, a man who had lived and died in the buildings many years before, and they decided to hang it in the market as a historical artifact. When Hurricane Ike hit the city in 2008 and left the building in 10 feet of water, damaging so much of the property, the picture remained unharmed, despite falling in the water. During their annual Day of the Dead celebration, the photo is included on the altar, along with many other objects and candles. With a 3-person rotation to ensure it's done, the candles are extinguished at night. Yet every year, the candles are mysteriously already burning the next morning. Number 3. Haunted Train Tracks, San Antonio. On a dark night in 1936, at the rail crossing on Shane Road just outside of San Antonio, a tragedy occurred which would rock the state to its core. An after-hours event at the local elementary school had many students staying late that night, and the school bus service was diverted till later in the evening. When it was time to go, students loaded up and headed home. Unfortunately for some, this would be their last ride. The bus had been working better than ever all evening, the bus driver noted, and suddenly it stalled out on the rail tracks. The driver tried to restart the vehicle, but it was no use. Then suddenly a train appeared. Its lamp must have been out, and it was too late to move the bus, even if it was working. The driver began to carry students off the bus as fast as he could, but then the bus was hit by the train side on, and the driver was thrown from the window. 10 students survived, but many others didn't. After recovering from his injuries and leaving the hospital weeks later, the bus driver got in his car and returned to the rail crossing that night. Haunted by grief, he drove his car onto the tracks, turned it off, and hurled his keys into the night, determined to take his own life. And when he saw the train charging down the tracks, he suddenly felt the car rolling forward, all the way off the tracks and out of harm's way. When he inspected his car, he saw multiple sets of small handprints on the back, perhaps those of the students, not wishing for his life to be lost in the same way theirs had. Number 2. Hotel Galvez, Galveston. After the devastating hurricane in 1900 that left many dead and much of the town destroyed, Galveston decided to rebuild. And with that came the Hotel Galvez. Many spirits are said to be lurking the grounds, even to this day, but the most infamous of them all is Audra. In 1952, she was staying in room 501, while her fiancé was out at sea working on a cargo vessel. When news came from the company that their ship had sunk and all hands on board were lost, Audra decided to end her life in the hotel room that night. But a few days later, her betrothed returned to the hotel. Reports had been wrong and he had survived the shipwreck, and elated to see his fiancée, he threw open the doors to room 501 and saw her body. Distraught, he then took his own life, laying next to her on the bed. And finally, we reach your #1 most suggested haunted place in Texas, Goatmans Bridge. This bridge in Denton once led to the homestead of a farmer, the Goatman, who was renowned for the quality of his farm's milk, cheeses, and meat. The former owner of the land never saw any such success while he operated the farm, and in a booze-fueled fit of jealousy, he attacked the farmer, put a rope around his neck, and threw him from the side of the bridge. He then returned to the homestead and burned it to the ground, taking the lives of the family and the livestock. When he returned to the bridge to check on his gruesome handiwork, he looked below only to see an empty noose. He then heard 3 loud metal clangs, like someone was knocking on the bridge. And then suddenly behind him, a large, ghostly man with a goat for a head appeared, put a noose around his neck, and threw him over the side of the bridge, taking revenge for himself and his family. Now they say that if you visit the old Alton Bridge at night and knock 3 times, you too will see the Goat Man. But be warned, he does not like to be disturbed.